Job chapter 25. You never know what we're going to run into. I never know what I'm going to say. So it's just kind of Job chapter 25. Bildad, one of his friends, Bildad the Shuhite, answered and said, verse 2, rule and fear belong to him. So this is a friend of Job coming with these statements. Rule and fear belong to him, talking about Elohim, Eloah, God. Rule, meaning dominion, is actually a verb, so a participle, ruling and fear. Ruling speaks of authority, speaks of the boss, speaks of the supervisor, the one who's making the policies, the one who's setting up the ways to do things. And when we think of our traditions, our lifestyles, we think of our pattern, think of things that characterize who we are and how we do things, we should be characterized by those things that God has put into place, by those things that God instructs us with. And so as we think of Elohim, as we think of the Almighty God, El Shaddai, we need to remember that this is his place, that ruling comes from him, and ruling and fear come from him. And so we want to remember that. I talk about the fear of God. We try to promote, the fear of God. People don't fear God very much today. And there's been a lot of teaching about the fear of God. It's not like really being afraid of God, but it's more like being respectful. That is included in it. We're going to respect him if we fear him. But if we think about things that we're afraid of, like spiders, like dark alleys, like our father, growing up, or whomever, we can look at that and we say, yeah, I know what fear is. I'm afraid. I know we had a strap hanging on the wall. Every house, and we moved quite a bit, but every house that we lived in, we had this razor strap hanging from the wall. And we knew that it was really quick for him to get to. And so we did not want to cross him very much. And if we did cross him, we knew that there were going to be consequences. And so there was fear there. There was fear there. I remember one time he left the house and we were 6 miles from the county road in the mountains, about 10,000 feet up, and our only transportation for 6 months out of the year was a snowmobile to get us to the neighbors so that we could ride with them into town. But as one of the things that we had trouble with back in those days was we kept breaking the windshield on the snowmobiles. We'd go through brush or chasing cows or whatever we're doing. And anyway, so he left and he said, whatever you do, don't break the windshield. I said, okay, Dad, no problem. I won't break the windshield. Well, we went out and started chasing rabbits on the snowmobile, and we went across a glacier, and rabbit went around this drift. It was, I don't know, 10 feet high, maybe something like that. But anyway, went around the drift. Well, I was going to cut him off, right? Yeah, so I went up over this drift and went airborne. But the drift on the other side, it was sloped, and I hit that and rolled the machine, and you know exactly what happened. Now, it was about 40 below zero, and I rode back home. I froze my ears. Fortunately, I froze my ears because Dad was hopping mad because he saw the broken windshield. But when he saw my ears, it was like, I got him, I don't have to whip him because God already took care of it, But anyway, I did not want to see my dad. But you know what? The fear of my dad kept me straight. Fear of my dad kept me from messing with stuff that my friends messed with, because I knew that I just did not want to mess with him. And we need to be there because God has the right to have authority in our lives. He is the proper authority. And so we need to take our commandment from him. We need to be doing what he desires for us to do as he sets up our orders. And so he is the rule of our life. He is the one who gives to us the policies and the commandments and how we're going to do things, what we're going to do. You know, it's when we have business. If you had a business and you had a store and so forth, there would be certain policies that you would expect people to follow. And as we think about that, God in his house, in his creation, gives us those policies. So fear is a good thing. Fear of God is a good thing. You don't have to fear the fear of God if you're doing what he has ordered us to do. He's not a tyrant. But he is the authority. So ruling and fear belong to him. With that then comes peace, making peace in his high places or in his heights, in the heights, in his elevated places. Sometimes when in the scriptures, when we see high places, we think of pagan worship, but this is speaking of his heights, his where he dwells, on the plane where he exists. So he makes peace. So when we follow his commandments and when we have the fear of God, which is the beginning of wisdom in our lives, in our hearts, then he makes peace. We get shalom. He creates shalom in our lives because we're not worrying about him chasing us down and worrying about him putting a sentence on us or whatever it is, because we know exactly what he's wanting us to do. So he makes peace by following his commandments, by fearing him. He makes peace in his high places, on his level, on the plane where he dwells. Verse 3, is there any number, or if there isn't, is there any number to his armies? In other words, they can't be counted. The word armies is not tzevaot, like we're familiar with, but it's a word that means company or his crowd, or basically all of the heavenly beings. There is not a way to count all of the ministers of God that exists. And we think of Messiah when he was talking to the disciples before his execution, and he said, I could call 12 legions of angels, to save me from the stake. But he said, this is why I came. So he went forward with that. Praise God that he did. So is there any number to his armies? No, there's no way of counting. And on whom does his light not rise? So kind of a statement here that says to us that God's light shines on everyone, on everything in the universe, okay? His light shines. John chapter 1, we go back to that again, which is very foundational. That he lights every man that cometh into the world. And so the light of God shines in our hearts. And so a lot of things that he's given to us here as he speaks, that we're not alone. We're not in this battle by ourselves. We're not trying to follow him without anyone else around us to help him. There are jillions of ministers that God sends to us to help us along the way. And so he gives us those ministering spirits, and his light is within us. Every one of us have his light in our spirits. And so all of these things that he's given to us, what a blessing it is. As we think about, as we contemplate God. Verse 4. So how could man be righteous before El? Before El, or what? Or what? Could a man be righteous before El? Or what? Could he be flawless who is born of a woman? So as we look at God and we look at his greatness, mankind in comparison to God is, well, there is no way to compare. But God is so perfect. He's so pure. He's so righteous. There's no comparison. No matter how good we are, we cannot stand righteous before Elohim without him intervening. How could he be flawless or pure who is human, who is born of a woman? And so Bildad is making this statement, showing us the distance that there is morally in our moral creation between God and man. Then in verse 5, so he's established that we are not God, we're not even close, but we are special, and God gives to us his strength and his power. So he goes on in verse 5, he says, see or look, lo, even the moon does not shine. And you look at his face and say, wow, what's he trying to pull over on us? I saw the moon last night. Today's a full moon. So that's incredible. I enjoy watching the full moon. This month the moon looks a lot like last month. I don't know where they get all these moons at. But anyway, so the moon does shine. What does he say? Even until the moon does not shine. So he's speaking of the month. He's talking about the dark of the moon. So from one dark of the moon to the other dark of the moon, as we look at this period of time, okay, so he's put a time frame there. So he says, even the moon does not shine, and the stars have not been flawless in his eyes. Now, God created the stars, but we know that the stars take different forms, and we know that, the stars fail, stars burn out, all of those things about stars. We look at the star and say, well, what happened to that star? It was there a minute ago, But the fact is that, so the word star that's translated here also means prince, can be translated prince. And so he says that within this month's time, how many times has the prince made a mistake? Think of the government. How many times has the government made a mistake in the last 30 days? Well, maybe once or twice. I don't know. They don't seem to be flawless. But as we see here, the stars have not been flawless or pure in his eyes. Second thing we see in verse 6, it says, how much less man, a maggot. Now come on, Bildad, quit putting me down. You're destroying my self-esteem here. But he says, what for? Okay, literally, what for? What for man, moral man, a maggot. The word maggot means a worm or a maggot, okay? What form? What for? Why? For what purpose? For what purpose is a man a maggot? I keep wanting to say magnet, but maggot. Okay, so we see the stars are not flawless in God's eyes. We see that man is like a maggot, like a worm. But we need to go on. It says, and the Son of Man, a worm. Now, it's maggot or worm, a worm or maggot. There are two different Hebrew words here for maggot and worm. They both mean maggot or worm. Okay, so we got that settled. Okay, so if you go to your concordance, you'll see that each word means a maggot or a worm. Just really base. But when we get to the second word here, a son of man, a worm, this worm is very prolific, and it's actually the worm that we got our scarlet or crimson dye from. And so some places in the scriptures, it's actually translated crimson or scarlet. And so it says here, what for? Okay, like why, all right, or how is this possible? Man being a maggot or a worm, and the Son of Man, scarlet or crimson. Something else that we see about this second word here is that it also means high or height or high places. It actually comes from the same ancient Hebrew word that earlier when we said making peace in his high places comes from the same word. So here we're looking at high places and crimson or scarlet. So even though we could translate this worm, it actually could fit in to be translated scarlet or crimson or height or high places. All right. So he's comparing here. He says in God's eyes, Bildad is saying in God's eyes, looking at his righteousness, looking at his perfection, looking at who God is and all of his strength and power and all those things about godness, man is a worm. But the Son of Man is crimson. The Son of Man, how is this possible? How is this possible that a man being a worm and then the Son of Man crimson? As I look at it in a practical sense, I think of parenting, and I think, we all as parents, we wanted to bring our kids up better than what we had, right? I mean, we want to improve on that. Not dissing our parents, but we want to improve on things that we felt could be improved upon when it came to our being raised, that we want to raise our children better if we can possibly do that. And so he's showing us this, that there's a progression. So even though we start with being a maggot, okay, then we go to the next generation, and if we bring up our children in a way that is in accordance with God's ruling and with the fear of God, and experiencing the peace of God, as we bring into the next generation, we see our children better people than we were at their age, because we are searching for that higher ground. We're reaching for that higher ground. So that may be just something trite that Bildad is saying. It's almost like, well, I've got to say something, so I'm going to throw this in here. But what he says is really motivational. He makes this statement. But the problem with Bildad when he talks is that he's coming from his brain. It's kind of the letter of the law kind of a thing, or maybe it's man-made. It's something that's coming from the inside, what he's come to believe as he speaks with his friends and so forth. And so Job then replies to this. So everything Bildad said is foundational when it comes to God, but it's empty in that it doesn't have the spirit to it. And so Job wants to add that as he comes in, he answers, and he takes from that and begins to build. All right, so here we see that even within a month's time, we can find that things happen. But if we're following God, we're going to find a path that will give to us the motivation that we need. But Job says here, all right, so then we come to chapter 26. And Job says in verse 2, how have you helped the powerless? Okay, talking to Bildad. Now Bildad has given us this foundational truth. He's told us how that there's such a difference between God and man. But then within, we can look back just in a month's time and we can see there have been problems. But we don't have to look back in our lives. We don't have to go back to the beginning. When I visit with people or counsel people, or people looking for advice, a lot of times in counseling, counselors will take people way back to, well, do you remember anything before you were born? What is the first memory that you have in your life? Did you ever have reason to be mad at your parents? You could go back you start digging up things that you really don't want to think about, right? But as we think about Job, he said, well, just go back a month. Let's take a look at the past month of your life. Okay, so we want to stay in that framework as we're thinking about what Job is saying. Just think about the last month, okay? That's easier, okay? Especially when you get to be as old as I am, it's easier to go back just a month. So we're going to go back a month, all right? So let's ask ourselves these questions, all right? Have you helped the powerless, the ones without vigor, the ones that have lost their motivation? Have you been a help? The idea of help is to be an aid. Have you surrounded them? Have you given to them the support that they need? Have you helped those that are without power? And then he goes on, and kind of like a colon here, saved an arm, not strong. Now we look at that. The arm is symbolic of strength, but it's also an extension. An arm extends. We extend our arm. Arm is an extension of our strength. The word saved here comes from Yeshua, which is Yehoshata, which means to be a savior, to save, to be a help. Okay, so have you brought aid to the powerless by saving their arm of strength, or arm that has no strength? Have you enabled them? Now, what's interesting about that is because of the fact that the arm is the extension, let's ask this question. Have you helped somebody to come to the place where they can actually be a help to others? Now, there are a lot of times that we feel like we've just been used, that we're helping people live to the next day or something like that. But actually to bring them to a place where they can help other people, and so we could be a positive influence in our community and be a help to other people. So that's a question. Have you helped the powerless, saving an arm, not strong? Verse 3, have you given counsel, advice to the unwise, or to those who do not have wisdom? Have you given advice to the unwise? Well, you say, well, I've tried. There's a reason why they're not wise, right? It is hard sometimes, especially if a person just doesn't want to quit talking. But have you given advice to the unwise? Have you tried to, when you see someone that's going astray, somebody that's getting off the right path, somebody who's going the wrong direction? It's like when we see somebody on the highway and we see that something's wrong with their car. I remember one time I was pulling a trailer and it was loaded. And I was going down the road. I had a 1-ton truck and I was pulling a 18-foot trailer and moving down the road, and somebody came by me. It was dark, and it came by me and honking, and so then I looked and I saw him motioning down and realized that I had blown a tire, and so I was able to get off the road. It's really nice. We're trying to come up with ideas about giving warnings about deer. If we could have like a flashing lights or something, where, people flash their lights, but you don't know if that means a deer or a cop or if they just can't figure out their light switch. You don't know, but, if we could come up with I think it's great that old people can drive, but I wish there was some light that would say, this is an old person driving. Give them space, Don't get mad at them when they run the stop sign. They probably didn't see it. But, there's certain ways you like to help people on the road. You like to help people as they're traveling. You see somebody in need. All right, we do that. Giving counsel to those who don't know a particular situation. So in the past month, have you had opportunity to help somebody out who was out of sorts or out of knowledge, or somebody that just needed some guidance? Counsel to the unknowing, the unwise, or declared sound advice to many. This is an interesting way of translating this. This is a difficult phrase in here, but basically, have you given like abundant? Have you given abundant word to show, the idea of showing, to show people? You want to show somebody, okay? You want to give them the knowledge. You want to declare it. You want to show them. Have you done it abundantly? That's a tough one, because especially getting back to working with children, a lot of times we'll just say something curt, or just short. Well, you should have understood what I was saying, or something like that, kind of the idea. But do we take time to show people? Do we give our instructions in such a way that people can understand what they're saying? And that's what do you put some effort in it? You're not just giving this counsel advice, but do you draw a picture? Do you use illustrations? How are your communication skills? Do people leave your conversation benefiting from what you have said? So Bildad, you said some really good things right here. You gave us some really heavy thought, but are you really helping people? Are you helping me? I don't feel helped right now. Okay? Then he says in verse 4, with whom have you spoken words? So with whom have you made these declarations, have given these speeches? Who do you talk to? Who do you talk to? Can you think back in the last 30 days? Have you talked to anybody that you really didn't want to talk to, but you knew that you needed to talk to? And whose spirit came from you? The word spirit here is neshama, and it's translated spirit or wind, or much like ruach, but it seems to have more of a intense, like a violent wind, like a blowing, not just a little bit more of it's kind of like ruach underlined. Okay, so as we look at this, whose spirit came from you? So when you are helping somebody, okay, you're trying to make your world a better place, right? Well, whose spirit are you operating under? You operating just out of your own spirit? Are you operating out of God's spirit? Are you operating out of the world's spirit? Are you doing things with, this is just what is expected of me by everybody else? Or what is your motivation? What motivates you? What is moving you to do what you do? Okay, so last 30 days, can you remember not a confrontation necessarily, but can you remember a interposition, a meeting with somebody that really needed your help? Maybe they didn't know they needed your help, but they really needed your help. Were you able to help them? Okay, so let's say that we need help. Okay, we need help in that area. So Job's going to give us some help. So here we have the wise man Job. In verse 5, the dead wait. A lot of us are just dead weight, right? Oh, that's tough, isn't it? The dead weight, the word weight here is like the word to twist, or it's like a waiter waiting on somebody, all right? Not like hanging out, but somebody that's waiting on somebody else, ministering to others. And he says the dead wait. The word dead here is Raphaim, and we see that in the scriptures, Raphaim speaking of the dead or giants. Sometimes the word is translated giants. But it's kind of the idea when it speaks of Rapha. It's kind of like what we think those who are living in the underworld. that they're bigger than life. Okay, so we think of Rapha. It's interesting because the word Rapha, also spelled the same and pronounced the same, also means to heal. Rapha means to heal or to cure, or it means to lax or to cease, which is where we get the idea of dead. So the dead, so he says the dead wait, the dead twist, they are involved, engaged. The dead wait, those under the waters, which would be down, as we see, down in the underworld. Those under the waters and those inhabiting them. Inhabiting the waters, making their abode in the underworld, the dead wait. So this kind of seems as though he's thinking of what they believed as far as afterlife and what the dead would be doing. The dead wait, those under the waters and those inhabiting them. But let's peel off a little bit. And when we think of dead, also we can think of the spiritually dead in our own life. Because the dead twist or dance about, they're productive. They are stirring. They are tending to things. But they're dead spiritually. And so he had asked in verse 4, he asked, whose spirit are you using when you're speaking and helping other people? And so we see here that the dead wait, those who are under the waters, those who are struggling, without God, they're dead spiritually. They wait, they do things that seem to be constructive. All right, so we take a look at that Rapha, the Raphaim. So I'm thinking of the dead in the grave, whatever they're doing. I think of the dead spiritually. We think of those who are without God, spiritually dead, as the New Testament Brit Hadashah gives to us, separated from God. So my question then comes and says, well, if the souls in the grave are doing what they do, okay, which I don't know what they do, but Job is just building this. He said, and the people who do not know God are separated from God, the dead, the pagans, whatever. Then the question is to me, what are you doing? You can do more than the dead do. You have the Spirit of God. You can do more than those who do not have God. And so let's look beyond that, all right? So the dead wait, those under the waters, those inhabiting them, Sheol, the grave, is naked before him. He's exposed before God. God sees what's going on. And destruction, abad, means to lose or to perish. And the noun here, destruction. Destruction has no covering. So we know that there's destruction. So God sees Sheol. God sees the destruction that's taking place. He understands what's going on, life after death. We could be more than that. We're more than just a zombie walking about. The Spirit of God dwells within us. He gives us the motivation. He gives us directives. So let's take a look at verse 7. It says, who stretched out the north over emptiness. Of course, we know, as we look to the north, we see the stars, and we're able to see the North Star. We don't call it North Star, but the North Star. And we see the stars that go around it. We see the big bear, and the little bear. We see the stars going around the north, which is that way. And we can watch the stars, and throughout the evening we can see the stars encircling the North Star. And then we can look to the south, and we can see the the constellations going over. And so evidently what God has done is he's made this cone. Looks like a cone to us. And so he's made this cone out of stars, out of these stars that make up our imaginary constellations. But he's made this cone, so it's like he bent or he stretched out these stars into a cone shape. And we can watch those stars moving throughout the night. And we can get a lot of information from those stars. But he stretched out the stars over emptiness, over Tohu. We see Tohu in verse 2 of Genesis. Without form and void, Tohu vavohu. We see that, emptiness or waste, desert. So he stretched out the stars. He bent the stars. It must be a cone. Must be like a cone. But he bent the star. He bent the galaxies or the stars in this cone shape that we're able to watch. You don't do that every day, right? So now he's look at what God has done. He stretched out the north over emptiness, hanging the earth, Eretz, the land, upon space. Word space, he says, upon, I don't know, whatever, that's what he says. I don't know what it's hanging on. Kind of think of some big hook out there someplace. How are these stars moving over the top of us? How does the sun go past us every day? How does the moon go past us and all of these things? At night we just see things happening. And so the land must be suspended somehow. We don't know how it is. God does things that we have absolutely no way of knowing how he does it. What he does is way beyond our capacity to know. He's way more powerful than we are. What he could do is so much more than what we could do. So as we think about this, he's talking about motivation, he's talking about helping other people. And I want you to remember that when you're in a situation where you can help somebody else. We don't want to do it in our own power because we're weak. We're just a maggot, But we have God with us. And God is the one who stretched the stars, stretched the galaxies over the north. He made this cone that we can watch every night and see these stars going around. I don't know what they told you in science class, but this is real. This is facts. Until about the Middle Ages, we believed that the Earth was basically flat. It was kind of in a dome shape, surrounded by water. All the way around was water, and outside of the water, you could go. When you went, the farther you went away from the Middle East, which was Jerusalem, actually, and not just the Arabs or the Jews thought this, but a lot of other nations believe the same thing, that Jerusalem or the Middle East there basically was the center of the Eretz, of the land, of what we translate earth. So we have the land, which is a little bit above the oceans, and then we have the oceans, and then the oceans go out, and as we take the oceans out, we go out. It was said, it was experienced by one group of sailors. They went out for 12 days, and then it gets dark. And it was so dark that they couldn't see to go any further. And so they turned and went south for 12 days, and they found an island that had some birds on it, but they didn't taste very good. So they went south another 12 days, and there was actually another island that had a king and the people there. And he said, yeah, we used to do this too, but we figured it out that there was no point in it, that if you sailed out, you'd go about 12 days out and you just run into darkness. And there wasn't anything after that. Where does that water go? Well, God in verse 8, binding up waters in his thick clouds. I'll get to that in a second. But he hangs the earth upon space, binding up the waters in thick clouds. So now we see the thick clouds. See, here's the difference between Bildad and Job. Bildad was going from what he and his buddies had talked about. They're people. The people discuss, and I don't want to diss what he says. But it's basically just head knowledge, okay? Job is saying, we didn't have a book back then. We didn't have Moses. There wasn't anything to read. So all we could see is nature. So we looked at nature to see what God was showing us. And we read nature like a book. Okay? So now we look at the clouds, and we see the clouds. We see the water in the clouds. The more water, the darker the clouds get. So the thick clouds were the dark clouds. But somehow God bound up the waters in thick clouds, but he did not let the clouds tear apart. Okay, so only when he wanted it to rain would he allow the bottom of the clouds to open up and the rain would come down. So first of all, we see how powerful God is. Then we take a layer off here, and we see in verse 8, we see that he's got this. That he's not going to give us more water than what we could hold. He's not going to allow us to come to the place where the bottom falls out. So we can trust him. He has control over how much water, how big the clouds can be. How can you apply that? How can you apply that to your life? Well, as you listen to somebody and you're listening to somebody who is going through some problems in their lives, you encourage them. Say, well, this is a lot, but the clouds will hold. The water will stay suspended. The cloud is not torn underneath it. It only opens up when God wants it to. Verse 9, covering the surface of his throne. So here the clouds again, kind of hiding the surface, the faces of his throne. It seems like God is hiding his throne. I see it here more like the idea of protecting. He protects the throne. So, there are a lot of enemies of God. A lot of enemies. But God protects his throne. God is the greatest. God is the Almighty. God is El Shaddai. There are other spirits, there are other ideas, there are other notions that we can overtake God, we can destroy God, we can put down God, we can make God seem to be irrelevant. All of these different ideas about God. But the fact is that God is going to protect his throne. He is number one, and he's always going to be number one. And no matter how destructive the enemy may seem to be, remember that God still is on the throne. God is still in control, and there's no one. He protects his throne. He protects the seat of command. He is the king. All right, so covering the surface of the throne, spreading his cloud over it. All right, he drew a limit. Okay, so here we have it. He drew a limit. He made an appointment. He made an assignment. He drew a limit on the surface of the waters. So this is your answer to your question. How do the waters outside of the earth keep from disappearing? What stops them? It's because God has put that appointment. God has made that declaration. He has made that determination. He has made that natural law. He drew a limit on the surface of the faces of the waters at the boundary of light and darkness. Or in Kofesh, light and darkness. He made a boundary. So we know we could sail out there. Maybe have a really good sailboat. We could go out 12 days before we hit the darkness. But at the boundary of the light and darkness, where the light and darkness come together, God put a law, a natural law, that said that water cannot go past that boundary. So we see the earth, okay, like a dome, like a round dome, and we see that we have our different land masses that we keep discovering. To the north, to the east, to the west, we don't go to the south because it gets too hot. But we believe that the water goes all the way around, even though we haven't experienced that. And, of course, looking to the east, the Mediterranean Sea, the Great Sea is underneath us, and so we have kind of two legs. Basically, we have Europe and Asia and Libya. Okay, those are the three continents that we're looking at. And so we have these waters, and we have this boundary. Wouldn't it be great to have a faith in God where we didn't have to be scientifically proven that something did what it did? We could just say, God does it. What's wrong with that? Why do we have to have something that we can look in a test tube or, can get under a microscope? What faith, wouldn't it be great to live 3,000 years ago and just trust God? I don't know where that water goes. What kind of question is that? Stand with your nose to the chalkboard. Don't ask that question anymore. God made that appointment. He designed it. He put the rule there. Okay? He made the boundaries between light and darkness. How's your faith in God? Do you keep trying to come up with some rationale? I know you say, well, that's just blind faith. You know what? Sometimes there's nothing wrong with blind faith. Just take it as he says it. If he said it, we can believe it. Remember that song we used to sing, God said it, I believe it. That settles it for me. Or we could change it and say, God said it, that settles it for me. Whether we believe it or not. Oh, that'd be great. Just to live where we just looked at the stars and the clouds in the sky and just read the book that God had given to us at the beginning. I praise God for the Bible. So he drew a limit. He put it in place. So we see here that God is in control. He gives us the assignments. He appoints, the word here for limit is appointment. He makes appointments. He appoints things for us. The columns of the heavens tremble. Now we think of columns as supports. So the columns of the heavens, we're thinking, we're looking at the stars. We say, well, those stars can't just be out there all by themselves. Something has to be holding them up. It's our experience that we can't, we throw a rock up, it's not going to stay in the air. It falls down unless we put some kind of support underneath it. So there's got to be some sort of support, some sort of column holding the stuff up in the sky, okay? But if we look at, from a spiritual point of view, the columns of the heavens, and we think of the armies of God, we think of all the thousands and thousands and thousands of ministering spirits that he has, and we also see that they're under authority. There are the archangels, there is an order within the armies of God. And the columns, we think of the columns, the marching columns and so forth. And so if we look at this as we see that God's army, when God makes an order, they're stunned at his reproof. They're stunned, they're awestruck when he corrects. The angels tremble at his correction. All right? By his power, he has calmed the sea. The word calmed here, it's interesting. It actually means to stir or to stir up the sea, to cause waves. And that's interesting because we see that sometimes in order to have a calm sea, you have to stir up the waves. You don't like to stir up the waves. Well, I know we have to say this, but we don't want to say it. This is going to stir up the dust. This is going to be a little bit personal, you know. This is going to cause some waves. Have you ever been there? Sometimes the dust has to be stirred in order for the calming. So we see the calm, which is a valid translation, but we also see the stirring up of the waves, which is also a valid translation, like some of your translations that you have may look at stirring or troubling the sea. It's calm the sea by stirring up the waves, and by his understanding, by his intelligence, he struck down Rahav. Now, translators use the word Rahav. Rahav means the proud, arrogant. Only a couple other places in the Bible do we see it used as a noun, as a name. And we see our translators use it as a name in this translation, which basically has traditionally been used to speak of Egypt. And so we see the stirring up of the sea, or the calming of the sea, by the intelligence. He struck down, he smashed Egypt. I don't know that Job, I see Job as living between Abraham and Moses, and I don't know, I know that Egypt, of course, existed during that time. I don't know why Job would be mad at Egypt. But maybe Egypt just was a type of pride, a type of arrogance. But you see, God's intelligence will put down the proud. So you see these things that Job has given us, and we're building on this. We see these things. So God stretched the stars over the north. He puts the clouds in the sky, and they hold just as much water as he wants them to hold. He protects his throne. He's always going to be God. He has the boundaries. He has the limitations. He puts the assignments where the limits are. Even the angelic host trembles at his reproof. He calms the sea by stirring it, by getting down to business. He understands. By his understanding, by the truth of God, he puts down the proud. By his Spirit, now we see Ruach in verse 13. By his Spirit, he adorned garland. Think of garland. He adorned the heavens. By his Spirit, he adorned the heavens. And we see back in Genesis chapter 1 again, the Spirit moved upon the face of the waters. By his Spirit, he adorned the heavens. His hand ruled the fleeing serpent. Okay, so I'm going to end with this. Because when a preacher says that, that means it's like 20 more minutes. But so we know that the earth is surrounded by water. We know that we can only go as far as until it turns dark. We know not to go any further than that. But what we also know by the stars, we also know that there's a great dragon, a great serpent that surrounds the earth. In fact, it's such a great serpent that its head basically can touch its tail. And it stirs the water to keep the water aerated, keep it from getting stale, keeps moving in the water. And some sailors have seen this huge dragon serpent. People have testified we're certain that we saw the serpent, we saw the dragon in the water. That's a pretty awesome thing to be sailing in the ocean and see that dragon. But we see it in the constellations. It's one of the largest constellations. 80-some stars make up the constellations. constellation of the dragon or the serpent. At the head, above the head of the serpent, is Hercules, who has a drawn sword ready to pierce the serpent. And so here it says that God's hand whirled or pierced or bored a hole in the fleeing serpent. So when the serpent saw God, he took off, but God put his sword into him. Now that puts a little different experience as far as your prophecy is concerned. We see the dragon in the book of Revelation. We see the dragon in Isaiah, different places where the dragon is speared. The dragon is pierced. Well, throughout civilization, throughout our knowledge, the growth of knowledge, we found out that there are times when the dragon gets pierced, when the dragon is stirred, and where the dragon would keep the ships from moving to the borders of the waters. Sometimes the dragon is, and maybe not totally destroyed, but he's kind of pushed back a little bit. He's moved out of the way. And then we start saying that Libya or Africa is a lot bigger than what we thought it was. Even though we don't like to go there because it's so hot. But there are even maps that have been made back in the early centuries that the Christian era, early centuries, where it actually shows the border of South America. Doesn't show much about North America, but the border of South America, and it's almost like every once in a while God moves the darkness, God moves the dragon. God moves, and we're able to discover new land. We didn't know Asia was as big as it was. But it's pretty good size. And so God continues to move and continues to give us more and more knowledge. And as we think about that, we realize that what we know is not all that we need to know. And there are a lot of people in our experiences with God that seem to be content to know the earth and to see the earth as this domed piece of land surrounded by water, guarded by a dragon with darkness bordering the waters. And there are a lot of people spiritually that are still seeing their environment in that confined system. God wants to slay the dragon. He wants to slay the dragon in your life. He wants to grow in your life. He wants to be big in your life. He wants to consume you in a way where you're overwhelmed by him. Go beyond the boundaries. Now, there are things, he still puts up boundaries, and he says, that's just for me to know. One day we will find out, maybe not in this life, but in the next life, but one day we may find out. But there are some things that he doesn't want us to know, but he wants us to continue to learn. And it's through his knowledge, through his understanding, through his intelligence, that the proud are defeated, the Egypts of Mitzrayim of the world are defeated, and where the Spirit of God can grow and the dragons can be slain, and we can move forward, and we can break out of the bondage of the thinking, the thinking that binds us, and we can break out of that bondage and grow to the new world. There's a reason why North America wasn't discovered until after so many centuries. Because every time new land was discovered, God had to slay that dragon. He slayed the dragon, and we moved forward. We moved to newer lands, to newer countries. Now, underneath the earth, we believe that there are, under the, on the other side, there's probably just a lot of people just like us. But we don't worry about that because they don't bother us. They're just doing their own thing. We're concerned about our world. So we take these lessons that Job was given to Bildad and said, Bildad, you're on the right track, but you're really shallow here. Are you really, with the things that you said, are you really helping somebody? Or why don't we think about it just a little bit this way? Why don't we take a look, just broaden our thinking just a little bit more? Now, who can you help? Has there been anything that we've looked at today where, wow, that's a thought. That's something you're always in the scriptures, you're always coming across new things that you never thought of before. And next time you come across something, that wow moment, say, oh, God just killed another dragon. I hope that you have opportunity to help other people, because there's no greater joy than just being able to help others in their life and to see them come to a place where they can help others. What a blessing that is.